Ella Morgan never believed a single moment could rewrite the course of her life. She went to the charity ball simply to support a cause dear to her heart, the children's center where she had volunteered for years. But fate had other plans. One masked stranger. One accidental kiss meant only to raise money for a good cause. She thought she'd never see him again. Until she realized he wasn't just anyone, he was the secret millionaire whose hidden decisions now threatened to destroy the very place she loved most. Torn between trust and betrayal, hope and heartbreak, Ella would have to risk everything to fight for the dreams she believed in. And maybe, just maybe, discover a kind of love she never thought she'd find. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The chandeliers of the Grand Marquette Hotel glistened like frozen waterfalls, casting a warm, golden glow over the crowd of San Francisco's finest. Beneath the grand archways and silk-draped balconies, laughter and conversation rose in a soft, glittering hum. Ella Morgan stood near the edge of the ballroom, clutching her small velvet purse tightly in both hands, her heart hammering in a confusing rhythm of nerves and excitement. She had borrowed a dark emerald dress from her best friend, one that clung to her slender figure and brought out the flecks of gold in her light green eyes. A delicate silver mask framed her face, hiding just enough to make her feel bold. Yet here, among glittering gowns and men in tuxedos, Ella couldn't help but feel like an imposter, a young woman whose world usually revolved around children's storybooks and fundraising bake sales, not champagne flutes and whispered fortunes. Across the room, a grand stage was set where a charismatic announcer with a booming voice hyped up the next item on the auction list. A mystery kiss, one bid, one masked stranger, one kiss for charity. It was a tradition of the ball, a playful indulgence for a good cause. Ella had no intention of participating. She had come only to represent the center, hoping to encourage donors and perhaps secure new support for the children's programs. The center had been struggling for months. If funding didn't come through soon, they would have to close their doors forever. She sighed, trying to calm her racing heart. This wasn't her world. She didn't belong here. That's when a flurry of activity at the stage caught her attention. The previous auction item had ended, and now the announcer's voice rang out, full of teasing excitement. Who's feeling brave tonight? Step right up for a little mystery, a little magic, and maybe a moment you'll never forget. There was laughter, applause, and a surge toward the stage. And somehow, in the shifting crowd, Ella felt herself nudged forward, almost against her will. Her heel caught slightly on the plush carpet, and she stumbled straight into the hands of one of the volunteers in a black suit, who grinned and motioned her onto the stage. Panic seized her. She shook her head, trying to back away, but the crowd had closed behind her. A sea of silk and velvet, faces blurred behind elegant masks. Cameras flashed. People clapped. Before she could think, the announcer spotted her. "We have a volunteer. Brave and beautiful," he cried, and the spotlight swung around, blinding her. Ella froze. She had always hated being the center of attention. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But then she thought of the center, of little Ava, who loved drawing fairies, and Jamal, who dreamed of becoming an astronaut. If one kiss could help save them, could she really refuse? Swallowing her fear, Ella gave a shaky nod. The crowd roared in approval. The announcer continued, "Ladies and gentlemen, place your bids. Remember, it's all for the children." Ella stood rigid as the bids flew up, laughing, teasing, coaxed higher by the thrill of the game. She could hardly hear the numbers. Her vision blurred. She wasn't kissing anyone real, she told herself. It was all in the spirit of the night. Harmless, meaningless. The winning bid was announced. An astonishing sum that made her knees wobble. And then a tall figure stepped forward from the edge of the stage. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him like a second skin and a dark, simple mask that obscured most of his features. Only his mouth, firm, sculpted, was clearly visible. He moved with a quiet, effortless confidence that somehow cut through the noise around them. The moment he reached her, the world seemed to tilt slightly. Without a word, he took her hand. His touch was warm, steady. Ella's breath caught. The announcer stepped back, giving them space. The crowd leaned in, hushed, expectant. Ella forced herself to meet the stranger's eyes, even though she could only see the intense blue peering through the slits of the mask. Something in that gaze made her heart trip dangerously in her chest. Then he leaned down, slow, deliberate. Ella closed her eyes just as his lips brushed against hers. It was meant to be a fleeting kiss, a symbolic gesture for charity. Nothing more. But the moment their mouths met, the room seemed to fall away. The kiss was soft, gentle at first, almost hesitant, but beneath that was a heat that stunned her, a surge of electricity that zipped down her spine. Her fingers tightened involuntarily around his hand. For a breathless moment, it was as if they were the only two people alive. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. The stranger pulled back, his face unreadable behind the mask. He bowed slightly, the gesture both respectful and curiously intimate. Ella stood frozen, dazed, as the crowd erupted into applause. Flashes from cameras lit the room like lightning. She had no words. No thoughts. He released her hand, lingering just a heartbeat longer than necessary before disappearing into the crowd with effortless grace, swallowed up by the swirling sea of gowns and laughter. Ella blinked, reality crashing back in slow waves. She stumbled off the stage, cheeks burning, heart hammering, mind racing. Who was he? And why, despite everything, did it feel like a piece of her had just gone with him? She shook herself, scolding her foolish imagination. It was a kiss for charity. Nothing more. Still, as she made her way to the refreshment tables, her lips tingling, she found herself scanning the room, hoping for another glimpse of the masked stranger who had, with a single kiss, turned her whole world upside down. Ella spent the rest of the evening drifting through the crowd, her heart still caught somewhere between disbelief and wild, reckless hope. Every time she thought she caught a glimpse of him, the man in the simple black mask, he was gone again, vanishing between swirling couples and laughing groups. Eventually, she gave up. It was better this way, she told herself. A kiss, a moment, a night she would lock away like a secret treasure and never speak of again. By the time she slipped into the chill of the San Francisco night, her shoes pinching her toes and the hem of her dress heavy with exhaustion, reality was already reclaiming her. The children's center. The bills. The letter she had found tucked into the mailbox just that morning, the one she hadn't dared open yet. Ella wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and hurried home through the sleeping city, her mind racing far faster than her tired feet. By sunrise, the fairy tale shimmer of the night before had faded completely. She stood in her tiny kitchen, blinking at the official notice in her hands. The board of directors had voted. Due to lack of funding, the Sunshine Children's Center would officially close its doors in 6 weeks unless a major donation came through. Ella slumped into a chair, the paper slipping from her fingers. They couldn't close. They couldn't. She thought of all the children, of 7-year-old Jonah who finally learned to read after months of tutoring, of shy little Mia who had found her voice through painting murals on the center's cracked walls. Without the center, where would they go? Tears pricked her eyes, but she swiped them away angrily. She wasn't the type to crumble. Not when there was still even the smallest chance of saving what mattered most. After a shaky breath, Ella pulled out her laptop and began drafting a desperate plan. Emails to potential donors, grant applications, appeals to the city council. She didn't know if it would be enough, but she had to try. She was still working, hours later, when a knock sounded at her door. Frowning, she opened it to find Lily Walsh, one of her oldest friends from the center, standing there with an armful of coffee cups and a concerned expression. "I heard," Lily said simply, pushing her way inside. Ella didn't bother pretending she didn't know what she meant. She just nodded miserably. Lily handed her a coffee, then sat across from her. "There's something else you should know." Ella braced herself. "The board," Lily said slowly, "they're considering selling the property to a private developer." Ella's stomach twisted. "You mean demolishing the center?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Turning it into luxury condos. Fast money." Ella buried her face in her hands. She had known things were bad, but she hadn't realized just how ruthless the situation had become. "I can't let that happen," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion. Lily placed a hand on hers. "You're not alone. We'll fight." But even as Lily said the words, doubt gnawed at Ella's heart. They needed money, real money, and they needed it fast. Later that evening, as Ella walked to the corner market for groceries she could barely afford, she caught sight of a familiar face. Across the street, standing beneath a flickering streetlight, was a man in a dark suit. At first, she thought she was imagining it, the strong line of his shoulders, the way he seemed at once perfectly composed and strangely restless. But when he turned slightly and the light caught the edges of his profile, something in her chest tightened painfully. It was him. The man from the ball. No mask now. Just a face she would have recognized anywhere, sculpted features, serious mouth, eyes that seemed carved from deep ocean stone. For a moment he simply stood there, staring at her as if caught in the same stunned disbelief. Then he moved, crossing the street with purposeful strides as though the night itself had bent to bring them together again. Ella's feet were rooted to the sidewalk. Closer now, she could see the faint scar slicing through his right eyebrow, giving his otherwise polished appearance a rugged, almost vulnerable edge. He wore the tailored clothes of a man who belonged to the city's upper echelons. But there was something in his stance, something tense, almost uncertain, that set him apart from the usual arrogant elite. When he reached her, he stopped, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Ella Morgan?" She blinked. "How do you know my name?" He offered a small, almost self-conscious smile. "I asked around. After the ball." Her heart thundered. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "That night. Brave." Ella swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to run, to hide from the way his eyes seemed to see straight through her defenses. Another part, foolish, reckless, wanted to step closer. Instead, she managed a breathless, "Thank you." For a moment, they simply stood there, suspended between the past and the present. Then he extended his hand. "Lucas Blake." His touch was warm, firm, grounding. She stared at him, realization dawning slow and sharp. Lucas Blake. The name tugged at something deep in her memory, whispers of headlines, rumors, a man whose investments had reshaped entire neighborhoods in San Francisco. A man who could buy and sell dreams with a signature. A man who might very well be connected to the board's mysterious private developer. Panic flickered at the edges of her mind. But Lucas's gaze remained steady, sincere. "I'd like to help you." Ella's breath caught. "Help me?" He nodded. "I know what's happening with the children's center. I have influence. Resources." She felt the world tilting again, just as it had when he kissed her. But trust was dangerous. Especially now. Still, something in his voice, quiet, almost vulnerable, kept her rooted to the spot. Ella squared her shoulders. "I don't take handouts," she said softly. Lucas's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Good. I'm not offering one. I'm offering a partnership. A way to fight back." She hesitated, heart pounding. She didn't know him. Not really. But she did know that time was running out. And maybe, just maybe, this stranger who had turned her world upside down wasn't a mistake after all. Maybe he was exactly what she needed to save everything she loved. Or maybe he was the one who could break her heart beyond repair. Ella stared at Lucas Blake, searching for any hint of deception beneath his calm exterior. Trust didn't come easily, not anymore. Especially not when the stakes were this high. But he didn't press her. He simply waited, his hands still outstretched, as if he understood that this choice had to be hers and hers alone. Slowly, cautiously, she placed her hand in his once again. They arranged to meet the following morning at a small cafe near the bay, far from the glass towers and polished offices that Lucas undoubtedly knew all too well. The place smelled of sea salt and roasting coffee beans, with creaky wooden floors and faded photographs of old fishing boats on the walls. Ella arrived early, clutching a folder filled with grant proposals, budget reports, and desperate contingency plans. She wore simple jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back into a loose braid, trying to armor herself in practicality against the chaos swirling inside her. Lucas arrived precisely on time. No security detail. No entourage. Just him, button-down shirt rolled to the elbows, a leather jacket slung casually over one shoulder, a few strands of hair ruffled by the ocean breeze. For a moment, he looked almost normal. They ordered coffees, sat by the window, and Lucas leaned forward, folding his hands together on the table. "I've reviewed the center's situation," he said quietly. "You're not just fighting for survival. You're fighting against people who don't want you to win." Ella's throat tightened. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made it harder to breathe. Lucas continued, his voice low and steady. "The property's already in negotiations. Developers see dollar signs, not children." Her fingers curled around her coffee cup. "Then why bother? If it's a losing battle?" He smiled slightly. "Because some battles are worth losing money for." He hesitated, studying her. "Because you kissed me without knowing who I was, and for the first time in a long time I wasn't just another deal to someone." Ella's heart twisted painfully at the unexpected vulnerability in his words. But more importantly, Lucas added, his tone sharpening, because what you're fighting for matters. For a moment, she just stared at him, overwhelmed. Finally, she found her voice. "What exactly are you offering?" Lucas pulled a slim folder from his jacket and slid it across the table. "A silent partnership. Funding to pay off the center's debts. Enough to stabilize operations for at least 2 years." Ella's eyes widened. But there's a catch, Lucas said, holding her gaze firmly. Of course there was. You'll remain the public face of the center, he continued. The kids need a hero they can see, not a man with a messy reputation in the media. Ella frowned. You mean, no one can know you're involved? Lucas nodded. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She hesitated, flipping open the folder with trembling fingers. The terms were shockingly generous. Almost too good to be true. What do you want in return? She whispered. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. Only what you were already trying to do, save the center. Give those kids a chance. Ella bit her lip. Trusting him could be the biggest mistake of her life. Or it could be the one decision that saved everything she loved. She closed the folder slowly. All right, she said. I'll do it. Relief flickered across Lucas's face, so brief she almost missed it. They shook hands again, sealing the strangest, most precarious alliance Ella had ever known. Over the next few days, Lucas worked quietly behind the scenes, clearing debts, negotiating delays, buying time where there had been none. He never asked for recognition. He never pushed. He was simply there. Sometimes Ella caught glimpses of him outside the center, standing in the shadow of a tree, watching the children play with a strange, aching softness in his eyes. Other times he appeared with practical gifts, new books for the reading corner, fresh paints for the art room, a repaired heater just before the first cold snap of winter. Bit by bit, the center came back to life. The children's laughter grew louder. The halls, once hollow and uncertain, buzzed again with hope. And yet, for all the good he was doing, Lucas remained an enigma. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the bay, Ella found him sitting alone on the back steps of the center, staring out at the water. She hesitated, then sat beside him, pulling her knees up to her chest. Thank you, she said quietly. He glanced at her, one corner of his mouth lifting. You're the one doing the real work. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the cool breeze tugging at Ella's braid, the last rays of sun painting the world in gold. Finally, she asked, why are you really doing this? Lucas didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was rough with something deeper than guilt or obligation. Because once, he said, staring into the fading light, someone saved me when they didn't have to. Ella turned to study him, the hard lines of his profile softened by the sunset. And because, he added almost too softly to hear, for the first time in a long time. I want to believe I can be the good guy. Her heart ached at the raw honesty in his words. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand, just lightly, just for a moment. Lucas's fingers curled around hers, holding on as if afraid she might slip away. And for the first time, Ella let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, the stranger she kissed wasn't just a mistake after all. Maybe he was her second chance. The following weeks blurred into a dream of hard work and fragile, blooming hope. Every morning Ella opened the doors of the Sunshine Children's Center to find small miracles waiting. New equipment delivered overnight, mysterious donations filling their battered supply closets, repairs quietly completed without fanfare. Everywhere she looked, signs of life returned. But the greatest change wasn't in the building. It was in the people. The children laughed more easily. The staff stopped glancing over their shoulders, waiting for the axe to fall. And Ella, though she would never admit it aloud, felt something shift deep inside her too. Lucas kept his word. He stayed out of the spotlight, operating from the shadows like some improbable guardian angel. He never asked for thanks. Never demanded more than she was willing to give. Yet somehow, without meaning to, he became woven into the fabric of her days. A steady presence. A quiet source of strength. Sometimes he would linger after the center closed, helping her scrub walls or rearrange battered furniture. Other times they sat together on the roof under the stars, sharing coffee from chipped mugs, talking about everything and nothing. Ella learned that he loved classic cars, that he hated elevators, that he once dreamed of being an architect before life and money swept him elsewhere. Lucas learned that Ella had lost her mother at 16, that she had spent her college years juggling 3 jobs, that every battered crayon and broken swing at the center represented a piece of her stubborn, relentless heart. Bit by bit, their walls crumbled. One evening, after a long day organizing a charity fair, Ella found herself laughing helplessly at Lucas as he wrestled with a stubborn tent canopy, cursing under his breath. "Hand it over," she teased, grabbing the tangled pole from his hands. He mock-scowled but let her take over, watching with folded arms as she wrestled it into place with surprising skill. "You're dangerous," he said dryly. "Deceptively dangerous." Ella flashed him a grin. "You have no idea." For a moment, their eyes locked, and the air between them changed. Something unspoken crackled in the space separating them. Something fragile, electric. Lucas stepped closer, so close that Ella could feel the heat of his body against hers. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then snapped back up to meet her eyes. Her breath caught. He hesitated, hands clenched at his sides, as if fighting some inner battle. Ella's heart thundered in her chest. She should step back. She should say something light, break the tension before it broke her. But she didn't. And neither did he. Slowly, cautiously, Lucas lifted his hand and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers trailing featherlight against her skin. The touch was so tender, so achingly careful, that Ella felt tears sting her eyes. For a moment, they simply stood there, breathing the same air, hearts beating in tandem. Then, with a low, rough sound, Lucas stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should go," he said hoarsely. Ella nodded, unable to find her voice. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then turned and disappeared into the night. She stood there long after he was gone, her heart aching with a sweet, unbearable longing. Something real was building between them. Something terrifying. Something neither of them could afford. But love didn't care about logic. Love slipped through the cracks when you least expected it and refused to be ignored. The next morning brought a chill in the air and a gnawing unease in Ella's gut. It started with whispers among the staff. Rumors about the center's sudden rescue. Questions about the mysterious benefactor no one had seen. And then came the first real crack. Ella was sorting through a pile of mail when she found an envelope marked confidential. No return address. No stamp. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A list of names, dates, transactions. At the top, circled in red ink, was a company name she recognized from the board's negotiations. Blake Holdings. Her stomach dropped. Blake. Her hands shook as she read further. The paper detailed property acquisitions, affordable housing units, community centers, old bookshops, snapped up and redeveloped into luxury condos and high-end malls. Blake Holdings. Lucas's company. The same company that now technically owned the mortgage to the Sunshine Children's Center. Ella's head spun. He had promised to help her. Had he been the enemy all along? Or was there more to the story? Torn between fury and disbelief, Ella shoved the paper into her purse and forced herself to finish her shift. When the last child was picked up and the sun dipped low over the bay, she found herself pacing the cracked sidewalk outside the center, heart hammering. Lucas arrived like he always did, hands shoved in his pockets, a tired but genuine smile lighting his face when he saw her. But tonight, Ella didn't smile back. "Tell me the truth," she said, holding up the paper like a shield. "Is this you?" Lucas froze. His face didn't change immediately. He had the control of a man used to high-stakes negotiations. But she saw the flash of pain in his eyes before he masked it. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly. "That's not an answer." He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly older, worn. "Yes," he said finally. "It's true. Blake Holdings acquired the center's mortgage years ago." Ella staggered back a step, betrayal slamming into her like a physical blow. "You lied to me," she whispered. "I didn't," he said fiercely. "I didn't know at first. I didn't realize your center was part of it. I swear." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to cling to the image of the man who helped fix broken swings and bought paints for shy little artists. But all she could see was the signature at the bottom of the paper. His name. His company. His betrayal. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I trusted you," she said, her voice breaking. "I let you in." Lucas took a step closer, desperate. "Ella, listen to me. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm trying to fix what I didn't even know I broke." But she couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears. She turned and fled into the gathering night, the letter crumpling in her fist, the sound of his voice chasing after her like a ghost she couldn't outrun. The days that followed blurred into a haze of stubborn pride and aching regret. Ella threw herself into work at the center, burying every hurt, every question beneath endless to-do lists and bright, brittle smiles. She organized art classes, fixed broken shelving, rewrote the newsletter, all the while pretending her world hadn't shifted off its axis. But at night, when the children had gone home and the halls stood silent, she couldn't stop replaying it. The look in Lucas's eyes, the raw sincerity in his voice, the devastating realization that he had been part of the problem all along. She hated how much she missed him, hated that part of her heart still twisted every time she thought of his hand brushing hers, his rare, breathtaking smile meant only for her. But trust once broken wasn't easily mended. Not when so much was at stake. Lucas stayed away. At least physically. But he lingered at the edges of her world, silent, unseen. Ella found traces of him everywhere, a bouquet of sunflowers left anonymously at the center's doorstep, a box of new science kits for the after-school program, a donation slipped into the fundraiser jar marked simply, "For the Dreamers." He wasn't giving up. But neither was she. One rainy afternoon, while sorting donated books, she found a note tucked between the pages of a battered novel. "I'm sorry I failed you. But I haven't given up on us. Elle." Her fingers trembled around the paper. Why couldn't he just leave her alone? Why couldn't she stop wishing he wouldn't? Meanwhile, Lucas prowled the edges of his own empire like a man who no longer recognized the walls he had built around himself. Deals were made. Contracts signed. Money shifted like tides at his command. And yet, none of it mattered. None of it filled the hollow ache that opened in his chest every time he thought of Ella's broken expression. Every time he remembered how she had pulled away, shaking as if he were something poisonous. He wanted to fix it. He wanted to tear down the entire city if it meant making her smile again. But he didn't know how. The truth was, Lucas Blake had spent so long living behind numbers and negotiations that he didn't know how to fight for something as fragile, as terrifyingly human as forgiveness. He had tried sending gifts. He had tried giving her space. Nothing reached her. He realized too late that some things couldn't be bought. Some hearts couldn't be negotiated into surrender. One night, standing alone on the rooftop of his penthouse overlooking the glittering bay, Lucas made a decision. He wouldn't hide anymore. He wouldn't fight from the shadows. If he was going to win Ella's trust back, he had to do it on her terms, even if it meant risking everything he had built, even if it meant she might walk away forever. The next morning, Lucas canceled every meeting on his calendar. Instead, he drove to the heart of the city's bureaucracy, storming through endless corridors and conference rooms until he found the right people, the ones with the power to decide the fate of the Sunshine Children's Center. It took hours. It took phone calls and political favors and a great deal of very public groveling. By sunset, he had done the one thing he knew might matter. He signed over full ownership of the center. No conditions. No strings. He transferred the property into the center's own nonprofit name, protecting it forever from redevelopment. The paperwork was filed. The press releases were sent. It was done. No one, not even Lucas Blake, could ever touch it again. And he hadn't told Ella. He didn't plan to. This wasn't about winning her back anymore. It was about setting her free. She deserved to build her dreams without the shadow of his mistakes looming overhead. She deserved someone better. Someone unbroken. Someone who hadn't spent so many years trading pieces of his soul for power. Lucas stood alone on the courthouse steps as twilight deepened around him, watching the city lights blink awake like distant stars. He didn't know if Ella would ever forgive him. He didn't know if he would ever forgive himself. But for once, he wasn't making a move based on strategy or profit. For once, he was just hoping. Hoping that somewhere, somehow, the girl who had kissed a stranger for charity might remember the man behind the mask. Not as a mistake, but as something more. Something worth saving. The news broke on a bright, crisp morning that smelled of rain and fresh beginnings. Ella was sipping coffee in the staff room when Lily burst through the door, breathless and wild-eyed, a folded newspaper clutched in her hand. "You need to see this," Lily gasped, thrusting the paper toward her. Ella set down her mug, frowning, and unfolded the front page. The headline hit her like a blow to the chest. "Mysterious benefactor saves beloved children's center, Lucas Blake steps forward." She stared, uncomprehending, as the words blurred and reformed. There was a photo of the center bathed in morning light. A photo of the signed deed transfer. And then, lower down, a picture of Lucas himself, no mask, no armor, just him, looking solemn and strangely vulnerable in a simple gray suit. The article detailed everything. How he had fought through city red tape. How he had donated the property outright, refusing all credit or publicity until forced by legal disclosure rules. How he had effectively cut himself out of the entire deal, giving away millions without blinking. Ella's hands shook as she read. He hadn't told her. Hadn't tried to win points or reclaim her heart. He had just given. Freely. Without asking anything in return. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. "He's been fighting for us all along," Lily said softly, squeezing her arm. "Even after everything." Ella nodded numbly. The staff gathered around, buzzing with shock and gratitude. Some of the older volunteers were crying openly. Ella excused herself and slipped outside into the bright, chilly air. Her heart raced wildly, 1,000 conflicting emotions battling for dominance. She remembered the letter tucked between the pages of the donated book. The silent gifts. The steady presence she had come to rely on without realizing it. Lucas had never been the enemy. He had been her anchor when everything else was crumbling. And she had pushed him away. The thought cut deeper than she expected. She found herself walking without thinking, her feet carrying her through winding streets, past towering skyscrapers and bustling cafes, past all the familiar landmarks of a city she had once thought she knew. Somehow she ended up at the bay where the water glittered under the pale morning sun. And there, standing alone at the railing, staring out at the endless horizon, was Lucas. He didn't see her approach. He stood with his shoulders hunched slightly as if bracing against an invisible storm, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. Ella stopped a few feet away, her heart in her throat. For a long moment, she simply watched him. The man she had kissed without knowing. The man she had nearly lost because of pride and fear. She thought of all the moments between them, the stolen glances, the shared laughter, the soft touches that spoke louder than words. She thought of the children playing in the sunshine because of him. She thought of her own heart, stubborn and bruised but still beating wildly in his presence. And she realized that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about spotless histories or easy paths. Love was about showing up. Again and again. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Taking a shaky breath, Ella closed the distance between them. Lucas turned at the sound of her footsteps, his expression shuddering instantly. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but she shook her head. "Don't," she whispered. "Not yet." Slowly, carefully, she reached out and took his hand. He stiffened in shock. Ella swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "You could have told me," she said quietly. "You could have made it about you. But you didn't." Lucas's jaw tightened. "It wasn't about me." "I know," she said, tears blurring her vision. He squeezed her hand gently as if afraid she might vanish. "I thought I lost you," he said hoarsely. "For a while," Ella whispered. "You did." The words hung between them, sharp and raw. "But you fought anyway," she continued. "You believed in something bigger than pride. Bigger than both of us." Lucas's throat worked visibly. "Ella, I never wanted to hurt you." A tear slipped free and tracked down her cheek. She laughed through it, a broken, beautiful sound. "I know," she said. "And maybe that's what matters most." He stared at her as if afraid to hope. Ella stepped closer until there was no more distance between them. "You're still not perfect," she teased softly, a watery smile curving her lips. His own mouth lifted in the ghost of a smile. "Never claimed to be." "Good," she said, rising on tiptoe. "Because neither am I." And before he could say another word, she kissed him. This time, it wasn't for charity. It wasn't for show. It was real. Soft and fierce and full of everything they hadn't been able to say. Lucas froze for a heartbeat, then crushed her against him, his arms wrapping around her as if anchoring himself to the only thing that mattered. Ella clung to him, letting the dam inside her break, letting the fear and anger and love crash together into something messy and beautiful and utterly theirs. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and laughing, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I'm still going to make mistakes," he warned, his voice low and rough. "So will I," she whispered back. He smiled, that rare, devastating smile that had first undone her. "Then we'll figure it out," he said. "Together," she agreed. "Always together." Spring crept into San Francisco quietly, dressing the city in soft greens and golden light. At the Sunshine Children's Center, the first blooms unfurled along the battered fence, stubborn and vibrant against the worn wood. Bright murals now decorated the sidewalls, painted by small, eager hands under Ella's careful guidance. The playground rang daily with laughter, sharp and sweet as bells. Inside the newly renovated reading room, Ella stacked freshly donated books, her heart full in a way she hadn't thought possible just a few months ago. The center was alive again. Stronger. Brighter. Rooted not in wealth or ambition but in the simple, stubborn belief that small miracles could happen if people fought for them. Ella paused by the window, watching as a group of children chased each other around the garden. And there, standing by the sandbox, laughing helplessly as a group of kids pelted him with foam balls, was Lucas. He wore jeans and an old hoodie, his hair mussed, his guard completely down. He looked happy. The sight twisted something deep in Ella's chest. Not the sharp ache of loss she had known before. Not the frantic, desperate fear that she might break again. This was different. This was peace. A quiet, fierce kind of love that grew not from perfection, but from surviving the storm together. Ella crossed the room, stepping out onto the porch. Lucas saw her and straightened, brushing foam off his jacket with exaggerated dignity as the kids squealed in triumph. She laughed, the sound effortless now, unburdened. He grinned at her, wide and unguarded, and crossed the yard in a few easy strides. When he reached her, he didn't ask for permission. He simply gathered her into his arms and held her there, steady and certain. Ella melted into him, breathing in the warm, familiar scent of his skin. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already written in the way Lucas tucked her closer, the way Ella buried her face against his chest, the way their hearts beat together in quiet, steady rhythm. Finally, Lucas pulled back just enough to look at her. "You did it," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You saved them." Ella smiled softly. "We did it." He shook his head slightly. "You fought harder. You believed longer." She brushed her fingers along his jaw, tracing the faint scar by his eyebrow, the mark of all the battles he had survived before her. "And you found your way back," she said. "That's worth just as much." He kissed her then, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that spoke of home and forever and promises made without words. The children cheered in the background and Ella laughed into his mouth, the sound bubbling up like sunlight. Later, as the golden afternoon melted into evening, they sat side by side on the front steps, watching the city shimmer in the distance. Lucas twined their fingers together, his thumb tracing lazy circles against her palm. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "there's a lot of empty space behind the center." Ella glanced at him, amused. And I was thinking, what if we build a garden? A proper one. For the kids." She smiled. "A garden." He nodded, earnest. "Somewhere they can grow things. Watch them bloom. Believe in something real." Her heart swelled so fiercely she thought it might break open. "I love that," she whispered. Lucas squeezed her hand. "We can start small. A few raised beds. Maybe some fruit trees later. Step by step." Ella leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Step by step," she agreed. They sat there long after the sun slipped below the bay, tracing futures out of starlight and hope, building a new story from the ruins of the old. A story not about perfect beginnings, but about imperfect, stubborn, extraordinary love. The kind that survived. The kind that grew stronger with every storm. The kind that started, once upon a time, with a single, accidental kiss at a charity ball and became everything they never dared to dream.